last couple of bits are to do with when a pine tree is either injured or dies, and even at that stage it keeps giving. So when we damage or cut into a pine tree, or even if a pine tree branch breaks, it oozes a clear sticky substance, sap. The sap contains a high amount of turpentine, which eventually, when that evaporates, it leaves a hard resin behind. And this hard resin has a real, pine fragrance like you'd get for your domestic cleaners and so on. That's exactly what it smells like, a pine forest. The substance is quite sticky. You can collect little shards like this that gather on damaged parts of a tree. They in themselves contain a bit of bark and a bit of fibre, but they are sticky. You can use it to do lots of things. You can seal a cut, because as I've already mentioned, there's an antiseptic property to pine. So placing this over a cut or a wound to reduce blood flow is one kind of survival technique you can use with pine resin. If you get it at the stage where there's still an amount of moisture left in it, then it still contains the turpentine, and the turpentine is flammable. So very useful again for starting a fire. It's a bit like having a wilderness fire lighting cube, so we can use that later to start the fire. And if you sort of, every time you're out in your travels you collect some, you can end up with a great chunk of it like this, which I've collected over the last number of weeks. This, if heated up over a fire, will melt. If you heat it in a container, you can put it into a pot of water, it will melt, and the liquefied part forms a very strong glue. You can mix it with some charcoal or some very rotten wood material, or even some sort of composted soil material from a forest floor, and then when it sets, it's literally like an epoxy resin. So you can use it to repair all sorts. It will literally glue two pieces of wood together, so it could affect any sort of repair to wooden bowls or vessels or equipment that you might have while you're out in the woods. So pine resin, you can use it also to melt it down. If you have a tin of some sort, melt it down, put a small piece of wood in there as a wick, and you can create a very effective candle from pine resin. Now the resin in the tree tends to accumulate at the nodes where branches come out from the main trunk. And if you find a rotten pine, you can select an area that is really well rotten. You can just pull these out. So these are the stubs of branches from a pine tree. What comes with it is the knot. And the knot, as I said, contains a high amount of resin. So again, for effective fire starting, these little pieces of dead wood are useful because they're dry and they're also high in resin content. And to light a fire with them, what you can do is take one whole branch like this that's round, take your knife, place it on, and with another stick drive through and split it, and you'll expose the internal of the wood. Now this sort of dark area, in most instances if you were lighting a fire, you'd look at that dark area and assume perhaps it was moist and therefore might not be very good. But in this case, that darkness is the resin. And although this tree's been dead many years, now that I've split it, I can smell pine resin. So I know that that again is going to be good for helping me start my fire. Now, last but not least, whilst I was out gathering these items from the pine trees to show you, I needed something to carry it in. So here's a piece of bark off a fallen pine tree. I have a instant bowl, platter, carrier, useful for shelter building. Layers of this over will give you like a roof tile effect, shingles that would shed water. And also for fire lighting in the wet, as this little piece here hopefully is demonstrating. I've built a fire, I'm waiting to light it, and this is keeping the rain off and keeping my tinder dry. Even to the point that if I light the fire, I may be able to use a piece like this supported to keep the rain off the fire until it's established. So I hope you agree that there's several uses to a pine tree. It's a highly valuable resource in the woods when you're bushcrafting. We often perhaps overlook it as a non-native species when we cherish our beeches and our oaks, but don't overlook the pine. It is a huge resource.